Good afternoon, everyone. This is Community Chats again from Montefiore Nyack, and I'm your host, Sandra Arevalo, and I'm the Director of Community Health and Wellness here at Montefiore Nyack Hospital. Today, we bring you a community chat that is about diabetes. And if you're asking why again diabetes, it's because November is National Diabetes Month. So it's so many people out there that have diabetes that we say, hey, why not dedicate the whole month to diabetes topics. And last week we had a very nice one that spoke about the role that weight plays or doesn't in diabetes management. And today we're going to be talking about the role of food. And yes, you might think, yeah, I know already it's all about carbs and I cannot eat sugar and this and that, but there are so many other things that we are not frequently told about the role that food plays in diabetes. And it's not just about carbs, it's also about types of carbs, for example, and other things. So to talk more about that, we have the expert today. It's our dear Elizabeth Stamp. She's one of our certified diabetes care and education specialists and a registered dietitian nutritionist here at Montefiore Nyack. And Elizabeth, tell me if I'm lying, but I think that you might have like, I don't know how many years of experience. Like what?
20.
That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say 20 at least. Yes. So you see, you have someone here that really knows her stuff. And daily she helps a lot of people with diabetes and all types of diabetes, type 1, type 2, gestational, and pumps and all of that. So if you want to ask questions, this is the person to ask, and we're very lucky that she made a little bit of time for us today. So thank you, Elizabeth, for being here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course. And if you wanna pull your presentation, you can do that and you can get started at any time. And again, to our participants, please join us and send us comments, send us questions, use the Q&A, the chat. I'm going to be looking at that and obviously, sharing that and get you all the answers you're looking for.
Okay, is it showing the presentation?
Not yet.
Okay. Is it just pulled it up? Let me see. Um, okay. Now, is it shared?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so today we're going to talk about different factors in food and how it affects how much our blood glucose spikes after eating. Okay, and definitely if you have any questions in the middle, just send them to Sandra so she can, bring them up and I can answer them during or after the presentation. Okay, so when we talk about, what are the general areas that affect how much your blood glucose might spike up after eating, one important factor, so we're going to go through them one by one, but one is the amount of carbohydrate, the timing of your meals and snacks, the quality, or you could say the type of carbohydrate foods that you're consuming, the composition of nutrients, so what other nutrients are in the meal, and then the sequence of food, so what order am I eating my foods in? So we're going to talk about all these factors and see how they affect how blood sugars spike. So let's start with the amount of carbohydrate. This really is pretty much the most important of all the factors. So blood sugar tends to spike when you have a large amount of carbohydrate in a meal. I mean, imagine you're eating rice. Well, if you're eating 1 grain of rice, you're probably not going to see anything happen with your blood sugar, versus if you're going to eat 5 cups of cooked rice, you would see a huge spike in your blood sugars if you have diabetes. So the amount of carbohydrate is obviously a very important factor in how much your blood sugar goes up. And of course, I gave that example of, the amount of rice, but sometimes people might say, well, I didn't have that much rice. It was only a half a cup. But if I had in that meal also some pasta, and I also had some corn, and I had some green peas, and I had some juice, and I had a piece of bread on the side, I maybe didn't eat that much of any of those foods. But if I eat all of them in the same meal, then that large variety of carbohydrates is going to cause me to get an overall still large amount of carbohydrate. And so I'm still going to see a large spike in my blood sugar after the meal. And in general, if I eat fewer meals, but they're larger meals with more carbohydrate, then even if over the course of the day I didn't have that much carbohydrate, I'm going to see higher spikes after those couple of meals. So for example, let's say I say, oh, I'm good, I'm not snacking and I'm not eating that much. I just had a bowl of cornflakes with banana and milk at breakfast, and then a plate of spaghetti at supper. But I only had 2 meals. They may even have been moderate, or slightly large meals, but because they were all carbohydrate, I got a pretty decent amount of carbohydrate. And after those 2 meals, I'm going to spike up. Even though as a nutritionist, this isn't what I'd recommend. Imagine if I took those 2 meals, but I broke each meal up into 3 much smaller portions, right? I broke it into 3, 1/3 of the size. If I had that mini portion of cornflakes and banana 3 times, and then mini portion of spaghetti 3 times, you would tend to not have as much of a spike in your blood sugars. That being said, of course, the best eating pattern much of the time is to have small, frequent meals, but a small amount, like maybe just 1 carb food or a really small amount of a couple of carb foods in each meal. And so that balanced meal would have other nutrients in it, like the plate you can see. It would obviously not be better to just have a little spaghetti, and then a little spaghetti. But if I break it up in those smaller amounts, it is going to help it not to spike as much. Okay, so that's really, a very, very big factor. But just because the amount of carbohydrate is a very big and significant factor, that doesn't mean there aren't a whole bunch of other things that can affect how much your blood glucose spikes as well. So it's really a good idea to think about the timing of meals and snacks. In part because it helps us to control, if I have some smaller meals and snacks, it's a little easier to control the amount of carbohydrate. If I only eat once or twice a day, it's really hard to get it to be a small amount. Like often we might recommend, around 45 grams of carbohydrate for the average woman and 60 grams for the average man in a meal. But if I'm only eating 1 or 2 meals, it's a lot harder to stick to that amount. Some patterns that don't work well would be, for example, let's say I am constantly snacking or grazing on carbohydrate foods during the day. So in other words, not my 3 meals and 1 to 3 snacks, but just eating. 45 minutes later, I'd like something else and then something else. I'm never giving my body a chance for the blood sugars to really go down because I'm eating so frequently. So I'm either going to see kind of just a consistently moderately high level throughout the day, or, it might go up a little and then it goes up a little more and a little more because it never quite is able to come down because of my constant snacking on carbohydrate foods. As well as the very infrequent eating that we already mentioned, because that can cause blood sugar, depending on the person, to spike pretty high above 200. It could go to even 300 if I'm eating that large plate of spaghetti or that large bowl of cornflakes with banana and milk in it. That being said, it is important to remember that the best eating pattern can be dependent on what my medication regimen is. So for example, if I am not on medication, or maybe I'm on a medication like metformin that doesn't cause low blood sugars and so on, it has a somewhat uniform action throughout the day. So in that case, it's especially beneficial to have those 4 to 6 small meals, balanced snacks, the 4 to 6 eating occasions throughout the day, because I'm going to see small rises in my blood sugar, not an extreme rise. On the other hand, other regimens, for example, if I'm using mealtime insulin, fast-acting insulin, like Novolog, Humalog, or Advilog, then the better thing to do would be most of the carbs that I need should be at my 3 meal times when I'm going to be injecting fast-acting insulin right before. In between meals, depending again on my blood sugar patterns, I might have non-carbohydrate snacks, or I might have snacks that typically need to be 15 grams of carbohydrate or less, depending on the tolerance of the individual person. Some people 15 they can have and they don't go up too high. Other people need to have a little less. So, in general, small frequent meals and snacks is a good idea, but sometimes when you're using mealtime coverage for the insulin, you may need to plan a little different. Okay. Okay, our next general topic is about the quality of carbohydrate foods. So we already said how much I'm eating at once is a very big factor. But after that, the type of carbohydrate food that I'm eating can make a difference in terms of how quickly I spike up. There are a number of ways in which this is true. And it has to do with how quickly the carbohydrate from the food is absorbed. And so, for example, carbohydrate is the most quickly absorbed nutrient. Protein, it can be absorbed into your system if it's just carbohydrate an hour or two after you've consumed it. Protein, on the other hand, typically takes more like 2 to 4 hours to be absorbed, from the stomach. And then fat can take longer. It could take 4 to 6 hours. And fiber in general slows down the absorption of carbohydrates as well. So when I look at the food I'm eating, if the food has protein or fiber, for example, or a little fat in there, it's going to take longer to be absorbed. Let's say, for example, white rice, if you compare it to brown rice, which has a little bit of fiber, it'll be a little bit more slowly absorbed. Not a lot of fiber, so it's a small difference. But if I change to, let's say, barley, then it may take even a little longer. Or if I change to quinoa or black beans, then those have fiber and protein, so they're going to take, even a little longer to absorb. So when I am choosing the carbohydrate food, I want to choose one, when possible, that has some fiber, some protein. If there are foods, for example, let's say a croissant. So the fat slows down the absorption, but you want to be aware that if you get very high fat foods, that can actually cause your body to become more insulin resistant for the next few hours. So what that means is maybe my body is producing the same amount of insulin it normally does, or maybe I'm injecting insulin and my body is not able to respond as well to the insulin as it normally does when I have a more average amount of fat in the meal. So that can cause my blood sugar to spike higher. So having fat in meals is usually a good thing, but more, a small amount of fat, very high fat foods can cause sometimes a higher spike in your blood sugars. For foods with carbohydrates, sometimes if it's more ripe, that can also cause it to become more easily absorbed, so can contribute to a higher blood sugar spike. Some foods' acidity helps to slow down absorption. So, for instance, sourdough bread is more acidic than normal bread, so sometimes people may see that their blood sugar doesn't spike up as high for the amount of carbohydrate that they've consumed when it's a sourdough bread. And there even are different types of starch. For example, there's a starch called amylopectin, and there's another called amylose. And amylopectin is highly branched, so it allows your body to break it apart more quickly because it has more spots for your body to break it down, versus amylose, which tends to be mostly long chains, and it has to be sort of broken down at the ends, so it just takes a little longer. And that would be an example of why something like sticky rice, which has more amylopectin, is usually absorbed more quickly, so can contribute to a higher spike in blood sugar, versus basmati rice, which has more amylose, so it takes a little bit longer for the body to break it down. Okay. So talking just a little bit more about different factors in the quality of the carbohydrate foods that you're consuming. There are a number of factors that have to do with sort of the processing. So for example, if something is mechanically processed, or, like, again, the cornflakes, they're very quickly absorbed. You know how you put them in the milk and they kind of just go, they get all soft and mushy pretty fast. In your body, it's kind of easier for your body to break them down too, as opposed to if you had like grains of corn where you have to chew them and your body has to kind of break them down more. It takes a little bit longer for the glucose to be absorbed into your body from those starches that, they break down into glucose. But first, your body has to mechanically break it down more if it hasn't been processed as much. Liquids tend to be absorbed more quickly for the same reason. So, for example, orange juice is going to spike you up more quickly than if you have to, chew up and digest, slices of orange. So, for the same amount of carbohydrate of glucose that you're receiving, the liquid is going to kind of get in more quickly and get a higher peak in your blood sugar. Most of the time, cooked food is easier to absorb versus raw. Let's say carrots. Carrots are not extremely high in glucose, but the glucose that they have is going to be more quickly absorbed when it's cooked versus raw. And ground up versus whole. So again, let's take microwave oats versus the Irish oats. So the Irish oats are more whole, and the microwave oats have been steamed and flattened and then kind of chopped up into little pieces. So they're still a good choice because they're still a whole grain with a lot of soluble fiber. But it is a little more quickly absorbed versus those Irish oats. And just to note, there are some cooked foods in some circumstances where they could create something when you cook it, like a potato. If you cook it and then it cools down afterwards, it creates something called resistant starch. And it's called resistant because it resists being digested a little bit more. So a little bit more of the starch is, it's sort of more slowly absorbable. So you're going to see your blood sugars take a little bit longer to rise and have less of a high peak afterwards. And they actually use this resistant starch. For example, there's something called an Extend bar, and it's used to try to help people maintain their blood sugars. So some people have blood sugars which drop easily overnight. So if people need a source of carbohydrate that kind of keeps getting into your system slowly, bit by bit, that resistant starch is one example. Okay. And when we're talking about the quality of carbohydrate foods, I just wanted to bring up, some of you might have heard of the glycemic index. And so I usually encourage people to think more about something called the glycemic load. And the reason is the glycemic load is a measure that can tell you how quickly a food spikes your blood glucose based on a typical portion of that food. It's not a perfect measure, but it kind of shows you, if it has a high number, that's based on it, kind of a normal amount of it that you would eat tends to make your blood sugars go up quickly. Versus the glycemic index is based on a kind of 50-gram glucose reference portion. And for some foods, that 50 grams is much more than most people would eat at one time. So, for instance, 50 grams of carrots, 50 grams of glucose in that portion of carrots would be a really giant portion. So a reasonable real life portion is going to, be much smaller than 50 grams. So it's probably not going to spike you up that much. So if you're looking for some sort of objective table, a table of the glycemic load would be more informative for trying to control blood glucose versus the glycemic index. However, most of the time, this could be kind of overwhelming and it's not 100% applicable to each person. We each have our own factors that we react to more than others. So usually the best way to try to figure out what are the best carbohydrate foods and to have for you and, you know, based on the best way of eating, because of course, all of these factors mix together. How often am I eating it? How much am I eating? Which carbohydrate foods am I eating? So it would be instead to write what I'm eating and then look at what my blood sugar is 2 hours or maybe 3 hours after I've eaten. So usually that is the better strategy as compared to poring over a glycemic load table. That being said, I just wanted to put this table so you can see that you know, there are some foods like white rice or bagels that do on average spike people up very quickly. So if you're going to eat them, it's a good idea to have them balanced with some other foods without carbohydrate and to control the portion size. And if we go to the other extreme, there are some foods that they may have a little carbohydrate, but they've also got a lot of fiber, like in the leafy greens, or like the peanut butter has a little carbohydrate, but also has a little protein, it has fiber, it has lots of fats in it, healthy fats. So these are foods where they don't tend to spike blood sugar up very quickly. Okay, so beyond the quality of the carbohydrate foods that you're eating, we don't just think about the individual foods. We also think about the meal as a whole, because it's really the meal as a whole that's going to affect how much you spike up afterwards. And it's not just, again, the total amount of carbohydrate. So we said, yes, let's say we said, okay, we want you to try to stick with 1 cup of a starch like rice in the meal. But then the other foods that I eat make a very big difference, right? So if I sort of can outweigh the carbohydrate with other foods. So besides my rice, I put salad, I put avocado, I put chicken, then I'm getting protein from the chicken, I'm getting healthy fat from the avocado, I'm getting lots of fiber in the salad. Because I'm getting a lot of those other nutrients, it helps to slow down the absorption of the carbohydrate in that cup of rice. So if I just had the same cup of rice on its own, I will see a quicker, higher spike, versus if I eat the other foods with it, I'm going to see a lower and slower spike. And again, just like we talked about with the individual foods, if I have a very high fat meal, that's going to cause more insulin resistance and it's going to slow down the absorption of the whole meal. So I'm going to see a higher spike, but it may not happen. Like if I'm checking an hour or two after eating, it may not, you know, happen right then. I might see that my sugars are not so high in an hour or two after eating. But 3, 4, even 5 hours later, I may see a high spike, and that's because the large amount of fat has slowed down the absorption. Now it's finally, the carbohydrate is finally getting into my system, and the spike is quite high because I'm not responding well to my body's insulin or the injected insulin. So I'm seeing a higher number and it can spread out for hours. So imagine me, I don't know, going to Applebee's and having fried onion rings with a breading on them and having, you know, chicken with a fatty sauce. And then I'm having mashed potatoes, and that combination of carbs and fat could mean that a few hours later, I go high and stay high. Sometimes people see high numbers the next morning from a meal like that. So one element that is very effective in slowing down the absorption of glucose is soluble fiber. So there's insoluble fiber, and then there's soluble fiber, which is a fiber that kind of links up with water. And that fiber is the one that is most helpful in slowing down glucose absorption. You can get it in oats and barley and beans, lentils, and various fruits and vegetables, but also sometimes like Metamucil contains something called psyllium husk fiber. That's another one that's very high in soluble fiber. So that's usually not a food we would eat, but people who take that, sometimes right before a meal, they might see that their blood sugars are not spiking as high. So having high fiber foods in general, and especially soluble fiber, can be one way of helping to make your blood sugars not spike as high during meals. So a couple of other factors which are important to keep in mind is one is caffeine. Some people are sensitive to caffeine, and they find that after they have coffee or another, for instance, beverage or food high in caffeine, they can sometimes see higher blood sugar levels after it just because of the caffeine. You do want to be careful though, because of course, what do we put in coffee? A lot of times, I could put creamer with sugar in it. I could put lots of sugar in my coffee. So I have to separate that out. But if I'm having, coffee without any sugar, just with a little bit of cream or something like that, I could sometimes still see that my blood sugar spikes afterwards. So I want to keep that in mind. Another factor which can affect blood sugar is alcohol. The more alcohol I have, the more it can interfere with my liver's ability to put glucose out in the bloodstream. So the liver stores glucose, and usually in between meals, it puts a little glucose back out in the bloodstream. If I've had a lot of alcohol, sometimes my liver isn't able to do that very effectively because it's busy detoxifying alcohol. So, because of that, we often recommend that people with diabetes have smaller amounts of alcohol, like only 1 drink for women or 2 for men, that they have it at the same time that they're eating moderate amounts of carbohydrates so that they won't go low because of the alcohol. However, the effect of alcohol is not predictable. It's not a good way of trying to keep blood sugars under control. It's more an unpredictable factor that we try to avoid having a dangerous hypoglycemia because of it by moderating our consumption and having it at the same time as carbohydrate foods. And of course, if I have a rum with Coke, or other drinks that have a sugary beverage mixed with it, then typically I'm still going to see my blood sugar rise because the effect of the sugary beverage is typically more powerful than the effect of the alcohol. So one final factor that affects how much blood sugar spikes after the meal is the order in which you eat the foods. So sometimes if I have the foods with protein, with fat, with fiber, but not with carbohydrate or not with any significant carbohydrate, before I eat the carbohydrate foods, it can actually slow down the absorption even more effectively. And probably the reason for that is since we said that protein is, takes 2 to 4 hours to digest. Fat could take 4 to 6 hours. Fiber slows things down some. So if I have those in my stomach first, then they've sort of started to take an effect on the digestion. And if I eat the carbohydrate food afterwards, then it's going to take longer versus let's say I had, orange juice first, it's going to be already getting into my bloodstream before I'm even consuming the fat or fiber or protein-rich foods in the meal. So the best thing would be if I have my, fiber like salad first, and maybe I have my chicken. I might have oil and vinegar dressing on the salad. So I have all of those things in my stomach already. They can already start to slow down the digestion. Then I can eat the bread. And I won't spike as high because of the bread that I'm consuming. So some people, find this impractical. Other people really like this suggestion because it can have a small effect, improving and reducing the spike. So these are a lot of different factors to consider. And again, the biggest thing to focus on is still to decrease your overall amount of carbohydrate that you're consuming at one meal or at one snack. And the second biggest factor would be if you can increase fiber, specifically soluble fiber, that really does help to slow down the absorption a lot. But all the other factors we mentioned can be helpful as well. And so the best thing you want to do is take blood sugar measurements, whether it's with a glucometer or whether it's analyzing your continuous glucose monitor readings, because you can learn. For me, okay, a couple of hours after eating, how did my blood sugars react? How high am I? What foods did I have? What mix of nutrients is in this meal? What was the size of my carbohydrate portion? And then I can see how much I'm affected by the different factors, so I can adjust my eating overall in the future and I can again try the same thing a couple of times to kind of make sure I'm really seeing it, because obviously we're eating different things at one time, or I could have been out for a long walk before this meal. So trying something 2 or 3 times is the best way to really start to understand how it affects your blood sugars individually, how you react to these different factors that we've been discussing in this presentation. So those are what I most wanted to discuss with you. I don't know if anybody has any questions about, using food to change, to try to reduce blood sugar spikes, how different factors affect you.
Yes, we do have a question here. It says, can you get higher sugars when you have a high-fat dinner meal at a restaurant? Like, let's say your meals, let me see, hold on one second. Like you have a high-fat meal at a restaurant, and then can you see that the numbers are a little higher at midnight?
That's a great question. So like I made that example about Applebee's, and I think that a number of factors kind of converge, because when's the most typical time that we would eat it? Kind of late in the day, we're tired, we just want to have fun and eat that meal. So if I go out, that meal is a combination. It's high fat, and it also has usually a significant amount of carbohydrate. So what you're going to see because of the fat is that the carbohydrate becomes even more powerful based on the effect of the fat. So usually those meals don't have no carbohydrate, and you still have a very, very high blood sugar. Usually they have some carbohydrate, whether there's rice or mashed potatoes or French fries or something like that. But based on the amount of carbs that I ate, I see even higher blood sugars than usual, because if it had been mostly steamed or boiled or baked, my sugars wouldn't have gone that high. But because there was so much fat in the meal, especially in those meals out where we don't control all the fat they're putting in it, I'm going to see higher numbers.
This is what I'm thinking, Elizabeth. If you eat a high-fat meal, it is recommended because your sugar doesn't go up that high. Agreed until then?
So a high-fat meal, well, I would say a moderate fat meal, right?
Okay.
Like if I had a meal like white rice with a few beans, I'm probably going to go high because it's mostly carbs. There's just a little bit of protein and fiber in the beans, and I don't have any source of fat, right? So then if I say, no, I'm going to add avocado, I'm going to add a salad and have a little olive oil on there, then that's going to be a better meal because it's a moderate fat meal. But if it's truly high fat, let's say I had a Big Mac and had cheese and fatty ground beef and had a milkshake along with it with lots of fat in that. And then I had French fries, which were also high fat. I'm getting carbs from all those food, and I'm getting fat, a lot of fat. So that isn't really the best meal choice, because it slows down the absorption some, but it then contributes to it spiking even higher.
Yeah, but what I was getting to is no matter what you do, it looks like your sugar is always going to go up sooner or later.
Well, it's going to go up some, almost always, if there's any carbs in that meal. But let's say we want to keep it under at least 180 2 hours after, right? And let's say if 140 is super excellent control, it's not really a problem if it goes up to 140, right? So if I'm having, the moderate meal with the avocado and the, rice and beans and the salad, I'm going to tend to see maybe it will spike up to 140 or so. Obviously, we're not focusing on my body and what medications I'm taking. Those are big factors in this as well. But let's say for me in my current situation, I'm going to see a higher spike from that high fat meal. So I wouldn't say really like, oh, well, it doesn't matter because I'm going to go high sooner or later, because it's not really so. If I control the carbohydrate amount, I have a moderate but not high, not excessive amount of fat, right? Then I could see better numbers.
Yeah. Now, you were also explaining about the fiber content in the diet. So one person is asking here, is a chunky soup better to eat than a blended soup? Does it make a difference?
Yeah. So I don't have like data on that, but it is true that in general, when things are really broken down for you. So like if I have a soup with potato, right? And it's a blended potato soup, it might have a small effect. But again, that's why I think we go back to check for yourself, because some of these factors, like if I talk about all of them, it might make it sound to all of you like, oh, these are all important, right? Whether it's blended or not, and how much carb, but those are not equal factors. Like we said, sort of in the conclusion, the really big factors are how much carbohydrate and the overall fiber content. I would say also pretty significant is protein and fats. On average, the other factors are, and I guess obviously having it all at once versus spread out, but the other factors are sort of minor factors, and then you have to discover how significant they are for you. So for instance, I wouldn't, for instance, some of my patients will say things, this is a different one, but on the ripeness, like, does this mean I should only eat green bananas? And I guess maybe I'm biased because I don't really like, underripe bananas. I would like to eat a ripe banana. I would check my blood sugars afterwards, but I wouldn't be forcing myself to eat something I don't even enjoy based on the fact that it might have a very minor, small difference in my blood sugars. So the soup, I would say, is the same thing. If I enjoy this pureed soup, I don't think it's a problem. And again, some soups are, like, say I made a soup out of beans and vegetables, it's already got a very high fiber content. So do I have to blend it? I mean, not blend it. Sorry, if I like blending it, I just ate blended split pea soup. It's got lots of fiber and protein and some carbohydrates. Do I have to eat it chunky now because of that? No. I think it's fine to have it blended if I like that texture, because it's got a lot of other factors on its side. But if I'm curious, I could check it with my post-meal readings to see.
Yeah, and if I might add, I believe that fiber, no matter the form, blended or raw or whichever form, it's not going to change the effect that it has in your digestive system, right? And
yeah, I think that, I was very unhappy because one time I read, I'm pretty sure, I don't remember, a journal article that did imply that the power of fiber could be reduced in its efficacy because it actually does get manually chopped up but it's still fiber. It may not, and so I personally would not want to be, again, nitpicking to that level. I think that what you said, even if there is some effect on the fiber from being blended up, I don't think it's significant enough. Like, we just want to get fiber. If possible, we want to get fiber from whole food sources, even if I blended it in a smoothie or a soup or something like that. It's, whole food sources are somewhat preferable to, the extracted fibers that they then add into this bar or this nutrition drink or something like that. Fiber is good no matter what, but from whole foods that you then use to cook, yeah, I would say are preferable. So I wouldn't, again, to me, I don't think it makes sense to worry about blending the soup or the smoothie or something.
However, I think that it does make a difference, and according to what you said also in one of your slides, it does make a difference if your carbohydrate comes in a different form. Like, for example, just like the regular white bread compared to one whole wheat bread, or the same white bread but toasted might not digest as quickly as if it's not toasted, right? So your carb does make a difference. If you blend the carb, it's gonna dissolve immediately pretty much in your blood as opposed to eating.
Right. So I guess one of the points would be if my soup is already very, very healthy, like the split pea soup or beans and vegetables, then the factor of if it's blended or not, I think isn't as big of a deal. Um, but it's certainly true, people say, well, I don't want to have to eat all these fruits. I'm just going to make myself a smoothie. And I think no matter what, eating the whole fruits is a better choice, but it's understandable. Sometimes I might prefer to have a smoothie. So in that case, I'm not winning the part of the equation of liquid versus solid because I've decided to have a smoothie and liquid is probably not preferable. But I can at least, if that's what I'm going to have, I can still try to make other factors work for me. So instead of say blending fruits in a base of orange juice, which would be kind of the worst, right? I could try putting low fat yogurt or low fat milk as a base. I could put protein powder, unsweetened protein powder. I could put things that have healthy fats in there, like avocado or peanut butter, natural peanut butter. So some people put spinach. I can put other nutrients in, so at least even though I'm drinking a liquid, it won't spike my blood sugars as much as a pure carbohydrate liquid. Sometimes I have, green juice has like a popular, oh, it must be so good for me. And I think, again, there are good things about green juice. Like I'm getting a lot of nutrients very efficiently and very available to my body, but whatever carbohydrates are in there are also very quickly available to my body. So again, I often say, okay, if you want to have a green juice, there are positives to it, but you better make sure it's mostly vegetables, right? Like maybe I choose a little green apple or a little bit of pineapple, something to give it a little bit of sweetness, but I'm going to try to mostly focus on putting in my celery, my cucumber, my spinach or kale. It could be ginger, lemon juice, things that don't have carbohydrates. And then if that's a focus of your meal, maybe you want to have a boiled egg, find some way to have some protein there too. So at least the overall meal, because vegetables are low in carbohydrate, but when you make them into a juice, it's a lower sugar juice than a fruit juice, but it still has some sugar in there, right? And it's in liquid form, so it's going to be absorbed quickly.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions here is actually about avocados or smoothies. Should you add a little bit of fat to a smoothie, like in an avocado or maybe a peanut butter or something like that to help, slow down the sugar spike?
Right, right, exactly. So that's what we were just talking about. I think that's a great suggestion. And like we said, maybe we can't because we want to enjoy our food. I'm not going to decide, okay, well, I'll just eat a pile of fruits with a spoon of peanut butter and some milk because the whole fruits will be better for me. And I have to have every single factor be ideal. Of course not. So if I want to enjoy my smoothie, I could do exactly what that person suggested. And that way I have some, the macronutrients and the fiber, will be a little bit more on my side, even though I am having a liquid.
Yeah. And going back to the blended, because, I love my attendees. They take notes. They say, you said that oatmeal is different when it's finer and carrots as well. And what I'm thinking here is about the blending or not blending. It's like sometimes when we blend foods, the amount is smaller. Like when you make orange juice.
So there's the airs.
Yeah,
there's
you
the
might
air
eat
space.
one orange, but it takes 4 to fill out a glass. So could that be a similar factor that plays a role here? That is like when you blend the food, you tend to eat more of that food because it's in that liquid form. So,
So right, there could be airspace depending on these preparation methods. And saying, okay, well, let's compare 15 grams of glucose versus 15 grams of glucose. So really that, in that case, it isn't relevant. But then the actual way that we really eat things, just like you said, is different based on that. Just like people sometimes say, well, isn't honey more natural? It is. It's still sugar. And also, when you take a spoon of honey, what happens? It clings to the spoon all over, and it's much harder to get a small amount as compared to white sugar. So I'm not saying white sugar is healthier than honey, but it's sometimes easier to take a limited portion with the white sugar because of that. So the blending, again, I don't think anyone is saying that it doesn't potentially have an effect, but I think it's again just the factor, like if it's a minor factor. So just like I did say the thing about the oatmeal, but it's not a major factor. So for example, I do try to eat healthy and I have no problem using microwave oats. I don't use the pre-sweetened ones with the, apple cinnamon flavor that's mostly sugar in there. But I have no problem every morning using microwave, oats, quick oats, because I think the difference between the quick oats and the Irish cut oats is not a big enough difference. And the accessibility or ease in my busy life is a big difference. So that's why perhaps I didn't communicate it enough, but these factors are not all equivalent, right? Like we said, the amount of carbohydrate is a really huge factor. The amount of soluble fiber especially is quite significant. Those other macronutrients and how you spread things out, those are all big factors. But the other ones are more of a, you might want to keep this in mind. If you have time to cook the Irish oats, then that could be a small positive thing. If you want to have a soup where you cook it and then you have the individual pieces in it as opposed to a blended soup, as long as you like both of those things, and there's no reason to blend the soup, right? But I'm probably going to still blend my split pea soup because I know that difference is so small, right? Just like the oats, the difference is small, but adding sweetener into my oatmeal is not a small difference.
Yeah.
Thus, I'm adding to the carbohydrates, and I'm adding quickly absorbed carbohydrate in the form of sugar, for example.
Mm-hmm. Now, here is, well, I guess it's our last question because we're running out of time. Is it true, this is like a true or false question, is it true that as long as you give yourself enough insulin, if you're already on insulin, if you give enough insulin, you can eat whatever you need?
Theoretically, but in reality, it's pretty hard to do that. So yeah, and so I think, and also, well, there's a whole bunch of things. Maybe you have something to say about it too, but in reality, insulin has its own action. So it's going to spike at a certain time. If I drink orange juice and I say, well, I can just take exactly the right amount of insulin, one, I can't really predict 100% what's going to happen. Two, the orange juice and some meals, if they're mostly carbohydrate, quickly absorbed carbohydrate, they're going to spike in my bloodstream faster than any insulin that we have on the market can act at this time. So what that means is my blood sugars are going to go high, and then finally, an hour and a half after I ate, maybe my insulin is finally starting to become powerfully active in my bloodstream. So then it's going to start finally coming down. But I've just spent an hour or whatever being above the goal. So that's not, I don't have to be perfect all the time, but doing that routinely isn't necessarily good for my health and trying to prevent complications long term. So it can be more complicated. It can be harder. Like the more carbohydrate I eat, the harder it is to exactly to exactly know how much I'm taking, and then the percentage by which I tend to be off is higher. So I'm more likely to have a high or a low based on the percentage that I'm off when I'm guessing how much insulin to take for it. So, anybody who has had type 1 diabetes and is trying to figure out how much insulin to take for a meal knows that this question is, it sounds like, oh yeah, I could just do that. But the reality is much, much harder, right?
I don't know what to tell you. I feel like, in conclusion, you gotta check your sugars after every meal, see which foods make your sugars go up higher, which ones don't make your sugars go up as much. And just to finish, it's like when you go to a restaurant, what's the first thing they give you?
Bread depends where I go.
Warm bread and butter. And who can resist? It's horrible. And according to what you said, it's like that should be the last thing you eat. So it's like, no, bring the bread
later. Bring the bread afterwards. Right, but remember, this is like information, and then each person is going to decide what to do with it. It doesn't actually mean it makes sense to act on every single one of these suggestions because you would make yourself crazy, right? So, for example, I don't tell every person who walks into my office with diabetes, well, you need to eat the carbs at the end of the meal. I only bring it up if it looks like they're working really hard to get excellent blood sugar control and that this might be the kind of thing that they would find doable. I don't mention it to most people because it would make you crazy. So I don't mention all of those quality of carbohydrate factors to each person because it would make you crazy. So this way you're aware, you can think about it. But the best thing is to focus first on the biggest factors. And then if you are in a state where, I'm doing pretty well, but I still some meals spike me up too high, what other of these factors do I think I might be able to take into account and adjust that might work for me, right?
Yeah. Well, last week, and I guess this is final thoughts now. Last week, when we were talking also about diabetes and how many things influence diabetes that we have Melissa doing the talk, something that we concluded is just do one thing at a time. Just do one thing at a time. Yes, fine tuning. We get that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So if I'm still eating huge amounts of carb, maybe I just want to focus on that first. And if I'm overwhelmed, whether I have a monitor, a continuous glucose monitor or the glucometer, I could say, okay, I'm going to pay attention to these things, or I'm going to do it one thing at a time. So, okay, maybe now I'll work on not having mostly carbs at the meal. Maybe I'll work on including a protein. But if you get to the point where you have controlled a number of things and you think and your blood sugars are still spiking above goal you'd like to work, you could take a couple of these other factors into account if you want.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I think that this has been really, really helpful, and I hope that it's been really helpful to our attendees. I know that a lot of people have diabetes nowadays, so if this information is useful, I'm gonna put the recording in community chats in YouTube, so you can feel free to share this information, and hopefully we get some people that say, well, this really helped, because I know that sometimes struggling with low glucose can be a challenge, to say the least. So thank you, Elizabeth. This was
Thank you for inviting me. It was nice to talk with you all.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you to our attendees for always being here and supporting our community chats. I will see you next week where we're going to be talking about diabetes again. There's so much to say about diabetes, but we're going to look at other factors. So it's all the secret hidden factors that affect blood glucose and we don't talk about. So more to come next week. Don't miss it, 12 o'clock. Bye-bye, everyone, and thank you.